world. Welcome to the Land Down Under Hangout. And today, it's not even night, we are discussing Monstrous Regiment by Terry Pratchett, which was just a bit of a off ad hoc read where we were just like, I said I'm gonna read this, and others said they wanted to read it, different covers. And so this is just sort of an extra read for us. All right, let's get started. Bobby, how did you go?
Yeah, it was fun. It was a fun read. It didn't require me to go in depth. It was just like a nice fun. When I was doing little bits and pieces, I could put it on and listen to it. It was good. And I did the audiobook, and I actually ended up with two different versions of the audiobook.
Oh,
So
I'm really interested to talk to you about that, Bobby.
okay, yeah. So like because I started with the one from the library, from my King County Library, which is in the States, and that was two narrators, male and a female narrator, or what sounded like a male and a female narrator. And then I had the one on Kobo to finish it off, um, which would have been the one that was available to the Australian market, I assume. And that one was just a woman. So, but yeah, and it was quite well done. It was fun to read, listen to. Good production quality. It was interesting how they did the footnotes, because I know that came up in a like side discussion with everyone at one point. Um, so yeah, it was good. I don't have much experience with Terry Pratchett, so it was nice that this was a good one. Like most of my experience to Terry Pratchett has been the BBC dramas, like the visual media, not the books so much. So
Awesome. Sarah?
thumbs up.
Yeah, look, this was I like Bobby, have not had much experience reading Terry Pratchett. I read some back in my late teens and enjoyed it, but just I guess a little overwhelmed or got into other things, you know. So I knew he was a very good and prolific author and really good world building, but I hadn't really investigated much else, and I really enjoyed this, and I actually it's a nice standalone from what I understand, which is also why I was interested when Mel said, I'm going to read this. I was like, oh, good. I don't need to know the entire, backstory of Discworld and everything. And I would say that for someone who doesn't know Terry Pratchett at all, this would actually be a really good entry point, because it was just really, really nice, and the characters were well-rounded. I have to admit, I ended up having to look for a fan created piece of art of everybody in the regiment, because I couldn't keep everyone straight to begin with. So I did get some of the spoiler of the regiment ahead of time, because they gave them both names. But really, it was very helpful to me to be able to keep track of everyone. And yeah, I had a good time. I'm looking forward to discussing with Bobby a little bit more about what our takes were on the audio books, because I do have some opinions on how that went for me. So yeah, but thank you for sharing this with us, Mel and Elizabeth.
Speaking of that, Kirsten, knowing that you haven't finished the book, there is going to be some serious spoilers. Are you going to be okay with that?
I already know a few things anyway, because I came across this book because I saw an article about it, and that article kind of spoiled it anyway, so I'm not concerned.
Awesome. You can go next then.
So yeah, I am this far through, which in 2 days of reading is pretty good for me, especially for a physical copy book, but I just couldn't get there. But I'm really enjoying it. I've been tagging things that I thought were interesting or funny, so like there's quite a few, because I wasn't reading on Kindle and I couldn't just highlight things. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. This isn't my first Pratchett. I've read all the Witches ones, and also We Free Men, and Good Omens, but that's kind of different. That's not Discworld, so it doesn't really count. But yeah, so I thought I would enjoy this, and I am enjoying it, and I will keep reading.
Awesome. Elizabeth.
Right. So I grew up with Terry Pratchett. I read a lot of him through my teens. However, I have not read a lot of the more recent stuff. So any of like the Industrial Revolution stuff, I haven't tackled. This was my first time through Monstrous Regiment. And So Terry Pratchett has a lot of nostalgia for me. You could always tell when someone in the household was reading Terry Pratchett because there'd be random bursts of laughter. And in fact, my parents banned me from reading him on car trips because I would explode with laughter in the back seat and startle everyone. So it was really good to kind of come back to him and read this and to burst out into laughter at different points. So that was really good for me. I really enjoyed it. I liked the cameos from characters who have been in the series before. Yeah, and I just really enjoyed it. And of course, as I mentioned on Friday night, I thought it was kind of interesting to read this following immediately from The Left Hand of Darkness. So, because there are definitely a lot of overlap of themes, but very different in tone.
Very different, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so. Yes, I enjoyed it as well. I did not discover Pratchett. Well, sorry, I knew about Pratchett very early. Pratchett. Ah, my God, what's wrong with my tongue? Can't do it, apparently.
Pratchett.
Yeah, thank you. I just can't think about it. If I think about it, I can't do it anymore, so I'm just going to stop. I discovered his books very early on, but I thought it was a series where you start at the beginning, and I tried to read Colour of Magic. I'd like to just give a warning. If you're someone who's very new to Pratchett, don't do that.
No,
I agree.
Skip the Rincewind books entirely. Like, he's not a good character.
Much. No, he's not. And so I never came back until later on when I did the Witches series, like Kirsten. I've done the whole Witches, and I really, really enjoyed those and highly recommend them. I think this is also a good spot to get started, even though it's midway point in the Industrial Revolution part of the Discworld series. It is actually, I think, not so dependent on those other stories, even though there's a bit of overlap. It's not that bad. And so it's a good spot to get started, I think, in terms of if you just want a taster, but not diving into a deep, deep world that's already existing. So it's a good one. But I also recommend Witches for that as well. Very good. Alrighty. So now when I first came across this book was in a podcast, and it was kind of described to me as kind of being a trans book, but it's really not. So I want to address that first, just in case anybody else is sort of like thinking about reading it and they've heard it described it the same way. Cross-dressing is the closest I would come to calling it, not really trans. I think there's only really one character that you could possibly make the argument for, but I think that's I want to check in with everybody on that. I think that's a case, it's less a case of trans and more a case of just got comfortable wearing male clothes.
I think I know who you're speaking to.
Yes. I'm being cautious when I shouldn't be because
I know.
Yeah, I know. I feel
don't worry about me. Like,
I know.
I was going to say, like, even just from what I've read so far, that I was going, well, Holly isn't going, like, she's not sort of feeling like she should be a boy. She's doing this out of necessity and then going, hey, look how I get treated when I'm dressed as a boy and I like this. That's not the same thing.
No.
So it's, but I did think I actually marked that because I just got past a bit before where what did she say? It says, have you noticed men talk to you differently? Hang on, it said lofty shyly. Talk, said Polly, they listen to you differently too. And I marked that because I was thinking this is something that I always find interesting to hear about from trans men about after they transition and how people talk, like how people treat them differently, presenting male rather than female. And I thought that was really interesting. But
it's got that overlap with certain topics. And I thought the focus on socks in particular was very interesting as well, because having a trans male husband and he will not go out without his socks and that sort of thing is very muchly sort of like I can see that sort of overlap of certain things that they're talking about, but by the same token they don't have the desire to be male. They just enjoy the experience and the freedom that comes from it, and it's more about the oppression of women and the experiences they were having as women than it was about being trans. So
yeah.
But I think that Jackram is the exception to that, because it's Jackram, right? Sorry, I read it in March. If I get names wrong, please just let me know. Jackram is possibly the exception because Jackram has been in male clothes and being male for so long. They feel at the end this real feeling of I don't feel like I can go back, and an embarrassment about it as well, almost. But again, it didn't come from a place of wanting to be male. It was really no different than Polly in the first place, and it just stayed, and then it became comfortable.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but I feel like that there's a difference here in terms of internal experience, in that we're getting everything from Polly's perspective. Polly never refers to herself with male pronouns or anything like that. Her internal experience is not one where she thinks of herself as a man necessarily.
Yeah.
Although she does note like thinking like a man and thinking like a woman.
With your socks was the
Thinking with your socks, yes.
I love it so much.
We obviously don't get Jackram's internal experience.
No, that's true.
And Jackram is only referred to by male pronouns. So I feel like there is a case there that it is reflective of Jackram's internal experience, but it's hard to say.
In particular, I think the reason that sort of I fell on the side of not in the end was that it was very deliberately left open at the end in terms of how Jackram chose to continue living. Was it as a grandfather or was it as a grandmother at the end, sort of thing? And that openness is what made me go, okay, I'm going to go on the side of he was comfortable more so than the being trans, but it was the very open. But I mean, this was published 2003, I think. It still would have been very early days for making that kind of like out there statement, I think. So I think you're right that it was left deliberately ambiguous as well. So it can be interpreted either way.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Sorry, I don't really have proper like questions or notes at this time. So
I want to just show everybody, just so you can see what I was looking at. And Jade's going to end up being cut off a little bit, but I'll show you. So this is. Can you guys see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Everyone see that? Okay.
You've got it too. Yeah. Okay. I'm not the only person who had to basically work out. Like for me, I was just trying to keep straight because I kept getting like names like Shufty and Lofty confused because they're just your typical army nicknames. So Maledicta or Maledict, like I loved from the beginning. And I was just was really there for that. And Wazza, of course, because Wazza plays an absolutely huge role in it. But yeah, I just trying to work out who everybody was part of it.
My all-time favorite was Igor. I loved Igorina so much.
Yeah. And and Igorina had such an interesting journey as well, and what was driving her to join the war, and within her own culture of what she can and couldn't do. I thought that was really interesting.
Women in the medical profession.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just loved her, like her full stance on I help whoever needs helping. I don't care what side I'm on, and all those sort of things.
I mean, she like they really positioned her as like in the medical field. You help the people who need helping. And then like it's predominantly the field of men in like a historically equivalent period.
I don't read a lot of watch a lot of war type films. The only one I've kind of seen more than once was Saving Private Ryan, and I just think about the they're not a regiment, but the group, the name of the Tom Hanks's group, everybody has a role and a speciality, and it seemed to me that kind of was within this regiment as well, like accidentally. It was like, if I think about Saving Private Ryan, one of the characters played by, I've forgotten his name, it's an Italian name, Giovanni Ribisi. He plays the medic, like every team has a medic, and Igorina was playing that role. And I don't, I just sort of felt like everybody sort of had that part, like Maledicta and Polly were kind of more of the strategic brains and the sort of seconds, and
Well,
the coffee thing was very funny.
Yeah. Having said that, like, I do wonder if that is just like a characteristic of any group rather than necessarily a military specific, like definitely military specific, but also book clubs. Like people have just different specialities and different interests, and I feel like that kind of tends to fall that way anyway.
I think it's also a case, I agree with what you're saying too there. I think that it's also a case that it's not just that people have different skill sets and different specialities, but also people rise to fill those gaps when needed within a group. So
Polly wasn't expecting to be a second, like, and if anything, Polly was wanting to be not seen, like not observed, and yet Strappy also kind of, I think, I'd actually like to talk about Strappy because I got a bit confused what the hell happened. Someone could tell me what actually went down when he disappeared. I think Strappy was very aware that there were some smart people in the group, Polly being one of them, and probably a bit smarter than him, and could sort of see through some of what was going on. And I think being kind of strategic and smart and playing a long game is also what got Jack from where he was playing that long game, seeing what was like, because I think Polly also, she could see, I see he has a strategy or a stratagem, as they say in Emily, and I was like, loved that kind of, she's like, he's up to something, I can tell. He's letting this go, but he's going to do something that kind of brings it all around. Which is kind of cool. So this is where I need help. So Strappy
was told he was being sent to the front. He freaked out and deserted.
Yes. Right? Okay. And then the bags got rifled through. And coffee. Okay. So help, because I got really confused. What happened?
He was trying to get information that he could use against people so that he could benefit his situation.
Right. But a spy for himself? Is that what you mean? Like he was?
No. He was like a what's the word? Like
a mole.
A mole.
Yeah. Okay. So he was spying on them for the Ruperts, for the Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I mean, the Nazis had their equivalent, like the secret police type thing. So tried to find dirt on them, freaked out, deserted, ran into the prince from the other country and his team, and told them what he knew to help kind of save his butt, and then presumably came back to the army when the tide of the war turned. And
so when he told the prince, was that before or after? Was that when they showed up at the inn because they knew? Right. And Strappy suspected there were females there, which is why
Strappy, I think at that stage, was just looking things that could help protect himself, because he's the kind of character that is not he's not there because he wants to save the country and things along those lines. He's there for himself. He happens to be doing this type of role within the army because that's what he's good at, but also he couldn't give a rat's ass as long as he lives.
He's a weasel.
Weasel, perfect.
I was just I found it a little bit confusing, the jumping around, and sometimes I was like, okay, so he's gone, but who's he seen? So I was just trying to understand. And then he ended up going to to the fort, to the lot, because it felt like he ended up, even though he didn't want to go to the front lines, he ended up there anyway. So I was just a bit confused.
Maybe imprisoned by the other side.
Right.
And then the fortress was recaptured by Polly and the others.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I was just a bit confused. What I knew he deserted, and then I couldn't kind of put all the pieces together.
So there's a lot of overarching themes in this. Obviously, there's the gender dynamics that we talked about a bit. Well, that was more sort of the cross-dressing aspect of it, but there's a lot of gender stuff in this that I think is really kind of interesting in terms of, I think one of the reasons he must have decided to create this separate country was because he needed an environment that was considerably worse for females than is in the rest of Discworld.
The separate country being Belgravia, or
yeah.
Right.
He's got a couple of countries that he works, usually tells his stories in. So city-wise, there's Ankh-Morpork, is that how you say it?
Ankh-Morpork, yeah.
And then there's also Lancre, which is the country where the witches are set and that sort of thing. But this one hasn't been used before, and I felt like it was very much so that he could develop this environment that was considerably worse for women, because there's my understanding, and Elizabeth, you'll be able to talk to this and Kirsten a bit more than I am able to. But in my understanding from the rest of the Discworld world is not this negatively gendered as this one was in terms of Belgravia.
I know. Sorry, you go, Elizabeth. I was just going to say I know about as much as you, Mel. So.
Look, it has been literal decades since I read these books, but I think Ankh-Morpork has developed through the books as well as like in the setting, if that makes sense. So societies evolve as Ankh-Morpork has, but Ankh-Morpork's depiction has also evolved. So and I think there's kind of like a vague nod to this in some respects, because Vimes sends Angua out to trail the regiment, right? Angua is the werewolf, and she is the only female member of the Watch when the Watch books first start.
Right.
So yeah, she's kind of like the trailblazer for them. And there is like dynamics in the Rincewind books about the difference between wizards and witches.
I do remember that.
Witches would not be allowed to attend the academy and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't say like Ankh-Morpork didn't start out as better for women, but had kind of evolved over the course of the books to be better for it.
Like Equal Rights specifically is about Nanny Weatherrat's taking a young girl to go to the wizard school because she's got wizard skills, not witching skills and things on those lines. So he's even in those earlier stages, because I think Equal Rights is like the third book or something.
It's early, yeah.
Yeah. That sort of thing's being addressed. Whereas what he needed for this particular story that he was telling was a world where it was very muchly women have no power. Like Polly's situation with the inn and how she can't inherit, I just don't feel like would exist, especially at this point, in Ankh-Morpork or Lancre might be a bit more.
Lancre maybe. Ankh-Morpork not so much, because it's supposed to be like a very cosmopolitan, multicultural city.
Yeah. So I feel like that's why he sort of told this story in a different part of the world.
Because by this point in the Discworld series, like Ankh-Morpork has like developed enough in terms of its equal rights, to borrow the book title, that it isn't a good setting for a story like this.
No. So Polly's situation as to why she went and everything, I thought was quite interesting in terms of all of this. Like, do you think she would have been going if it wasn't for the fact that her brother was the only one who could inherit and she didn't? It wouldn't have been a question if she could have gotten the in, sort of thing.
That's a tricky question. I kind of feel like no, but also like then there's that kind of like feeling of maternal responsibility. Like he clearly can't look after himself, and
Yes,
his maturity throughout the story is like he seems like he's like 5 years old or something, no matter what his age actually is.
She says that early on, because I haven't got up to like seeing him again, but like she was talking about that early on, like when even though he's her older brother, she's always had to look after him, and
yeah,
very much so.
I wondered if he was actually special needs and had an intellectual disability, because there's a bit at the end, sorry, spoiler, Kirsten, when she does find him, and they had put him like just, he wasn't being tortured, he was just in a room with some chalk. You know, they sort of found him something to draw and
with.
sort of draw with and just to entertain himself. And I think, I thought that's kind of was my takeaway, was that, like you said, he constantly needed help with bits and pieces and whatnot.
100%.
Our question, sorry, more spoilers for Kirsten.
Not gonna
be here if I was worried about
yeah. Did anyone sort of take away that maybe Shufti and Paul were starting a relationship, or Shufti was kind of taking on the role of Polly, you know, in the absence of becoming the, I wondered what other people's takeaway.
Both.
Sorry? Both, yeah.
Both. Okay, cool, right.
I felt like it was definitely there, wasn't being spelt out, but it definitely felt like whether it was going to go into a relationship or not, I wasn't 100% sure, but it definitely felt like it might be going that way. Regardless, it did feel like she was taking over the care of Paul so that Polly could
go forth.
Both with taking care of the inn, but also going off to war again. So
another spoiler, sorry. I loved the final scene on the boat when they were away, you know, when she's telling Polly's telling them, come on, we've got to go, man, we're head off, and the three people are coming running down the hill, and one of them is Maledicta. And I was like, oh. So I was a little bit put out in some ways that Maledicta ended up in a coma, because I really enjoyed her character.
She was fun. I love the concept and the idea of that you can overcome your vampirism, that by having a different obsession.
Well, it's like how my parents gave up smoking by chewing gum. Like my dad went through so much chewing gum when he gave up smoking, because it's like you can't just quit, you got to replace it with something else that's less bad.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I like, and that whole thing of, what was it, and Mel was passed out but had bitten down on the coffee bean so they couldn't get I was like, oh my goodness, this is that coffee addict. It was fantastic. Like it was like some kind of IV drip. That was hilarious. Yeah.
Actually, I went and did some reading of articles before this hangout, just because I couldn't remember the story as clearly as I wanted to, but didn't have time to do a reread. And I've got to say, there's a lot of people who were shipping Polly and Mal.
I mean, I can see it.
Yeah, I can see that.
I can see it, but I also, it's what you were saying on Friday, Elizabeth, about having wonderful friendships without there having to be romance. It also seemed to me like they both needed each other's confidence and to have each other's backs. And I kind of feel like, looking at like the fact that Mel was coming onto the boat, and I was like, I feel like these guys are going to be a really strong team, and they're just going to, you know, watch out, army. And I think what Elizabeth said, it's so nice sometimes to have stories where there's just really strong friendships, and you know, and not having to be romantic. And I loved Tonka and Lofty's obviously been in a relationship for a very, very long time, and was very sweet.
And through some
Yeah.
difficult circumstances.
Very
Like there
difficult.
was some dark stuff here, but like it
Oh yeah.
gets,
Wasn't it just? There was
Yeah.
some seriously dark stuff in this that was just sort of like not brushed under the rug, but you know, you could deal with it because there was enough levity in the story that it was like, I can handle it.
Terry
Yeah.
Pratchett is such a good writer like that. Like
the
he
balance.
really deftly handles some difficult material and is quite a subtle writer
Mm.
in many respects, in ways that are kind of easy to overlook, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, because you definitely know that Lofty and Tonka and Wazza have, especially Paul Wazza, like learning about her background it's just heartbreaking. It's just super heartbreaking. And like Polly,
Horrifying, really.
and
Yeah.
thank you, much better word. And then Polly reflecting on the girls who came to work,
Mhm.
it just be, and it's just like, oh yeah, this world's really awful. And I
like
don't know. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I don't know where I think he might have been taking some. I don't know. People can correct me if I'm wrong. I think I understood that Pratchett was taking some reflections of Catholicism with the whole Nuggin aspect to it, and like this is what can happen if you have a state run by religion that is so kind of gender specific on what people can and can't do.
I thought just religion in general, that whole thing, I was like,
yeah,
making, and they kept changing, like they keep changing the what was it again, the abominations, things you're not allowed to do, like and there's speaking about like the like, I just thought that scene right at the I think I wrote it down in my notebook rather than tagging it, when she was talking about the picture of the bird and setting fire to the picture of the bird, and like going, oh well, any god that wants me to set fire to this picture of the bird, like I really enjoyed that. I really liked that analogy, and it made me think about some of my own issues with religion, and when I just thought it was really well done. And in the middle of a book that like I'm tagging stuff because I think it's hilarious, and then you have these scenes that are just like really quite poignant and beautiful and say a lot about the world. This is why Pratchett is so good.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, the religion was a bit horrifying in ways that, and the whole Duchess thing was odd.
Let's talk about the Duchess stuff, because I also want to know. I mean, supernatural is a part of this world, right? We've got vampires, we've got werewolves.
100%.
Apparently, there are ghosts who can also like, what do you call it when they speak through?
Possessing. Oh no.
Possessing. Thank you. Yeah, no, you're right. The Duchess basically possessed and used her as an instrument to
yes.
And then I couldn't quite work out whether the Duchess just went, I've done my job, now I can rest in peace, or whether she was always going to be there with Wazza to a certain extent. I couldn't quite work that out. Okay, I'm good. I'm not the only one who kind of couldn't work it out.
I mean, okay, so actually this ties into Good Omens, because I feel like Pratchett and Gaiman have very similar like structures in their story, let's say, about faith and what faith does in terms of making the world as faith thinks it should be, if that makes sense. If enough people believe a certain thing, then it becomes true, or gains power, or something like that. And that is the situation with the Duchess. Like in life, she was nothing like that. As she said, I wasn't, I wasn't like that. But then all the prayers of the people have turned her into this entity sort of thing. That's where Pratchett and Gaiman overlap quite a lot, because obviously that is a theme through Good Omens and also through American Gods.
I was going to say American Gods. That's what that made me think of.
Yeah, and I mean it has come up elsewhere in Discworld many times. Like there's even a book called Small Gods. It comes up in relation to the entity of death, for example. and that sort of thing.
It's very possible
Having
too that they were influential on each other in terms of that as well, because they did get to chatting at such an early stage that this might have been a co-influence between them.
Yeah, look, I'm not sure whether it might have predated like their interactions with each other in some respects, because Gaiman's earliest work would have been what's it? Come on now, what's he famous for? No. Comics.
Before that,
Sandman.
Sandman.
Yeah.
Sandman. Yeah.
Yes. Because
So,
it was when he started working on Sandman that he first actually encountered Terry Pratchett. So the question is more whether they co-influenced each other or whether or not one influenced the other. Sort of thing.
I think that idea, though, is something that has been present in the world. I was just reflecting that we watched Coco again. We watch a lot of Disney movies. And the idea is this idea in there that if you are not remembered by your family, then you cease to exist in the afterlife. Like legacy is effectively being remembered by others.
And that is also a theme that has come up in Terry Pratchett and is big amongst his fans. So if you ever see New Terry Pratchett, GNU, that relates to one of his other books. The one about the telegraph, I've forgotten which one.
The Claxton, which I also had a question about.
The Clax.
What you mean? The Clax, yeah?
Yeah.
Is that, can someone help me? Because I was like, I knew exactly what, I don't know if I just encountered it like 30 years ago when I read a Terry Pratchett novel or something, but is this something that exists in our world, like that idea?
Yes, it's the telegraph.
Okay, good. But have we referred to it as the Clax in our world?
It's possible, yeah.
It's possible, but also sometimes I find Terry Pratchett, one of the things he often does is that when he wants to put an analogous thing into his world that's like ours, he'll come up with something that's either a term that might have been referred to it but not as the main term, or something that gives the impression of what it is without actually directly saying what it is.
To clarify, it's spelled with a K, right? Oh, it's not in the novels. Okay. So maybe I'm thinking, because when I heard it, I was imagining it spelled with a K, and I think I'm thinking of like the Claxton, like the announcing, the loudspeaker system. So maybe that's again like that's yes. Thank you. You've all helped me. There we go. That's where it's come from. Yes.
I was thinking it came from like the sound of the tapping the Morse code out,
which I also liked. You know, the clack, 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 clack. Yeah. But I thought that was really cool because I was like, oh, that. Well, it's raining again. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, thank you. That was what I wanted to check.
But I wanted to talk a little. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Go on.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the use of propaganda in the story, which I thought was fascinating and fun.
The word stuff with the newspaper.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
That's the one that makes me want to go read the whole series of the Industrial Revolution one, is because that one actually comes prior to this. And I was like, after reading that, I was like, I think I need to read that one. Because again, we've got that circumstance where we've got that sort of analogous type terminology being used for things in this one. And I find it fascinating that they didn't have newspapers before they had essentially movies in this world, but yes, The Truth, that's the one. And before that one comes Moving Pictures, which I'm like,
although Moving Pictures is quite a bit older.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Because I have read that one. That was published in 1990, whereas the rest of the Industrial Revolution didn't. I mean, The Truth is the second in the Industrial Revolution as the series, sort of thing, and that didn't get published till 2000. So it's 10 years after Moving Pictures.
I think the thing about it is that the Industrial Revolution one is less of a very clear series the way some of the others are, because they're uniting a couple of them that sort of fit under this theme of the Industrial Revolution element, but they're not always as directly related until you get to the Going Postal one, I believe it is.
Which is the one after Monstrous Regiment.
Exactly. And then after that, you get 3 in a row, which follow the same character. And so they sort of tag these other ones that led to that sort of stage on together. But because when I first found the Industrial Revolution, I was under the impression it was the Postal series, going from Going Postal. But then I found out that it was actually including these 3 others beforehand. Sorry.
No. It's the man was prolific.
He sure was. It's amazing.
Yeah. And
But
it's
I've got to
all in
admit,
his head, this world and its time spans, and it's
it makes
borders
it
and
so much
it's
more
amazing.
accessible to read the Discworld series, though, to break it up into these little sections.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
personally find it so much easier to go, oh, yeah, I could read 6 books in a series, as opposed to, what is it, 42, 43 or
Yeah.
something?
Yeah. I mean, that's why I haven't gone back, because I thought it was more like that. Like, it was more like, oh, there's 10 books I read, like you kind of had to read them in sequence. And when you said, oh, this is a standalone, I'm like, oh, I really don't understand how Discworld operates at all. And the only thing I kept thinking, except of course this is funnier, is I kept thinking of Sanderson and the world he's created, and that there's all these different stories, but they're interlinked, and he's also prolific, but also he writes these tomes, and sometimes it's just too hard.
I think
that Pratchett's like,
I think he was influenced by Pratchett in the way.
No doubt.
Like, he always said he wanted it to be like that you could read any series without having to read the others. But if you have read the others, then you
get little insights,
like the Easter eggs and stuff. Although he's losing that now, because he's really kind of linking them a lot in the last couple of books he's brought out. So that'll be interesting. I would say Sanderson's more like the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a great chart for Pratchett, like that I don't know if you've seen it, where you can see the reading, like, and it gives you different reading order parts, and it's like you can start here or you can start here. Have you seen it? I haven't seen it in ages. I'll have to find it, but it's
if you just Google search it, but then change to an image search, you'll almost always come across it.
Very cool.
Discworld reading order, and if you go to the image search, it comes up. It's like on an old-timey piece of paper kind of thing.
Yeah. It's the first. If you type in Terry Pratchett reading order chart, it's the first thing that comes up on Google Images.
Okay.
Honestly, if that had been available like back in 2005 or whatever, I know, what was it? Like, I was in high school. I visited a friend's house. It was one of my best guy friends, and he had his parents had built this bookshelf that went around the entire upper part of the wall. So like for the paperbacks, and he had all of them that had been published up until probably around 2003 or something, because he was reading all of them, and I was like, who's this? And he was talking about it. I was like, that sounds great. And he's like, well, these are all the ones in the series. And I went, never mind.
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah.
That's exactly the sort of feeling I'd had for ages. Whereas once you sort of go, oh, I'm just going to read this series of it, it seems much more reasonable.
Cool. Yeah, I think the reason why I had read Good Omens was because it was Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, and it had nothing to do with the Discworld series, and I was like, I can do that. And
I'm actually think it might have been reading Good Omens that made me want to read Terry Pratchett, because I don't think I had at that stage, but I could be wrong. I can't look, honestly, I read it like back in the 90s. It was only like a year or so after it had come out, and so I could have gone the other way. I don't know.
Yeah,
memory is not that good. We're talking 20 years people.
That was also why, going and watching all the BBC things that they'd done with Terry Pratchett, I was like, okay, I seem to enjoy how it's done, assuming that they're true to his work and the things, but that's like an hour. I can spend an hour watching a TV show or, 3 hours.
Yeah. Actually, sorry, I'll just refresh that. 30 years, people. Jesus Christ. Anyway.
I wanted to talk about the Ruperts to a certain extent, and the revelations. Sorry, spoilers again, Kirsten. The revelations that we have from Jack Krim about how many female Ruperts have infiltrated and come up through the ranks. And I wasn't quite sure how that happens when you're a Rupert, because having met Blouse, and the next one I want to talk about is Blouse, is how that, so much of what I understand also about the middle to upper middle class, which I can tell Pratchett's basing this kind of class system on, is that it's all about who's married who, what school you went to, what, it all kind of comes up. So how you go from that to going, being a female within that society, to then being able to, be a Rupert and come up through. So I was curious to know if anyone had any insights into that to help me, you know.
If it's got any basis in the British military experience, this was a way to raise your ranks.
Yeah.
So you might have entered the military as somebody who come from a family with no standing, but then you can actually raise yourself through the ranks and actually get standing in society through that. Which is why when you read like your Austens and things on those lines, there's a certain, from the gentry, there's a certain look down on particular people who have rank within that area. So persuasion is a very good example of this.
Yeah.
Was the first
but that where Anne's father is like, oh, I'm not going to have the sailors or anything on those lines be in my house, and that's not acceptable. But then later on, he sort of comes to accept it and to see them as, these heroes. They're renting my place and all that sort of thing. So the standing is, they've raised their standing through being in the military. Now that doesn't, if they enter the military with standing already, they'll probably enter at a higher rank in the first place.
Yeah, which is normally what happens with, unfortunately, that class system. Is that's why Jackram first to the Ruperts. Like Jackram's worked blood, sweat, and tears to get to where he is. That's why he's gathered all those ranks, because that's what's happened. But I understood, like Blouse is a really classic example. He's been in the admin, he's been given a title, but he's done nothing to really work his way up to it. So when he finally goes out as, what is it? Is it captain? I can't remember what he is when he's.
I think he was a captain, yeah.
Thank you, because I don't know which ones come first or where. I have no idea.
I don't really remember, but I'm going based on the fact that it feels right to say captain.
Private, corporal, sergeant, captain.
Well, it's good somebody knows. It's the kind of information that just goes in one ear and out the other.
See, the reason that this sticks to mind is because Pratchett has historically had a lot to say about sergeants and about corporals. If you've read the Guard series, Vimes starts out as captain. That's his, I think.
I was going to say, is Vimes in something else? Because he struck me as a character that possibly we're supposed to know.
Vimes is the main character of the Night Watch series, right? So he starts as a captain, kind of really, of the Night Watch, which is like worse than the Day Watch, right? So he's kind of really not, he's looked down on a lot.
Yeah, looked down on.
And then the two people underneath him are Sergeant Colin and Corporal Nobby Nobbs. And Pratchett, talks a lot about the kind of person who is a sergeant, right? And how there's kind of like a gravity towards being a sergeant. Like they become sergeants and they stay sergeants, which is what's going on with Jackram, right?
Yeah.
I remember Colin as being not like, if you've seen what's the Brooklyn Nine-Nine, right?
Yeah.
You've got the two older guys, right? Yeah?
Yeah, I know who you mean. Yeah.
Do you mean Hitchcock?
Hitchcock and Scully, yeah, that's it. Sergeant Colin and Corporal Nobby Nobbs are like the Hitchcock and Scully of the Night Watch.
Okay, that totally put it in complete context. That helped a lot.
But which is slightly different to Jackram, who is actually competent but wants to stay at a level that he's effective, basically. So I would guess is kind of like not only actively resisting being discharged from the army, but also actively resisting promotion.
I would actually argue you're probably
I was going to say
you're probably talking more about Jake, because he's actually good at his job, but he likes being a detective.
Yeah, I guess that is also a good analogy there too.
Yeah, I was going to say Jackram very much wants to be on the front lines, feels that's where he's most effective. He does get a weird kind of promotion at the end, though, which is good, which keeps him still on the front lines, but maybe more
also still
like real. Yeah, because he's still sort of a little bit more bigger picture, because he has that, they're like, actually, this guy could be really useful for some of the strategizing that he hasn't been able to do. Although he does end up retiring, doesn't he, to hang out to spend time with his family, which is really nice.
I got the feeling that Jackram had sort of been up and down the ranks.
Oh, that's not the impression that I got at all. Um, but I did feel like it is in dialogue with Pratchett's other writing about sergeants
Mm.
and that sort of thing. So it's not only like a kind of this is the way sergeants work, but like this is the world building around sergeants, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons where there is benefit in reading more of his world, because you get more of that conversation that he's been having about particular topics.
Yeah, because I mean, Sergeant Colin, he's not smart, right? He's not smart, but he is cunning in a similar way to Jackram.
Yeah,
right. Interesting. Yeah.
Because I feel like, sorry.
No. I was just you finish your thought.
I was just going to say, I think that there's similar sorts of things from having read the Witches books in terms of the place of women and the strength of women and things on those lines that you're getting in conversation with this as well. Like think therefore you can do and stuff along those lines, and the way that Polly sort of is so good at being male because she puts herself into the brain space and just believes it and things on those lines. So which ties to a lot to the witches and their power.
I wanted to talk about Blouse and the character.
Oh yes, Blouse, yes.
Yeah, which I also enjoyed the whole how all of the upper Ruperts, half of them being women by the end, are all clothing items. That was hilarious. It's very Pratchett. I laughed a lot. And what was it? Something corporate, someone cummerbund was the one that really cracked me up. It would be nice to have an item of clothing named after me, and I'm like, he's like a pair of gloves or something. It's very funny. What do we? Blouse was really interesting because he obviously goes on his own kind of journey with everything, and obviously, and I don't know whether he comes up in other stories because he obviously has a. He understands technology and he's stuck in a country that won't advance. He's kind of being wasted in the accounting department, and then he wants to get to the front lines. And
I mean, it sounds like the accounting department was a very good fit for him.
Yeah, although he was like, I want to,
Well, there's probably not a lot of opportunity to advance being stuck in that particular area.
He did revolutionize it, though.
Yes, indeed.
Their filing system or whatever it was.
I constantly had problems with the role of Blouse because I kept sort of thinking he actually, because he was competent at certain things, I kept wanting to trust that he did know what he was doing, but he clearly didn't know what he was doing compared to Jackram when it came to actually being out there at war sort of situation. And so I kept...
Yeah.
It was that Polly situation of who do I follow sort of thing. Because Jackram comes across as kind of heartless and brutal about how he does things at certain times, and yet at the same time it's war.
Yeah, and I think I had the same kind of thing. I was like, has Blouse known this entire time? No, obviously. So, like you said, Blouse was so clueless about some things, like he loved Scubbo.
That was a reference to his schooling, though. Like,
right,
he was a boarding school boy, right? And that's what they would feed them there, and so it was nostalgic for him.
And then the horse stuff was hilarious, like with the mayor who
that was the part I just finished reading, actually.
Yeah, but like he was also really switched on about stuff, because there was the bit where they're actually communicating and Jackram wants to go in. He's like, we wait till they finish the message, because then the others, like, I was like going, yeah, that, like, I understand why we're sitting here, I get it, like that's a very smart move, let them finish the message, then you've bought yourself time. Like, it all made sense, and Jackram didn't get it, and I was like, okay, well, Blouse definitely has some strategic ideas or understands that, and say, I've got the code book, I've got this, and where he wants to send a message back. I'm like going, yeah, he's also got, like, anyway, so there was bits like that.
I feel like that is generational commentary, though, like that Jackram doesn't get it. Like, he's like boomer right there. Like
that's actually a really good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that is a really good point, because I was sort of thinking of it more of a case of where this is where these sorts of situations shouldn't be led by just one person. I thought it was a commentary on the top-down way of always following one leader is not always the best way to go. It's better to actually have more than one piece of input. But thinking about it generationally makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just really, and then the whole catching him in the lie where he's like quoting the policy, and then he goes to the policy, and then it was like, yes, here it is. Even that Kirsten, but it's very funny. And it's like going, yeah, Blouse knows how to, like.
He's not completely clueless.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I was very kind of like wondering what the journey would be, and like the bit where like having Jack Grim and Polly did it again. I was like, your idea, sir. What idea? That we do this. It's a good one. We should do it. It's like, oh yes, I came up with that idea. Like I was like going, okay, like is he knows he's being played? Like, is it his ego that much needing to like? And then so I wanted to kind of explore that a little bit, like, because it was very comedically funny, but I was also like, he's showing himself to be switched on. So
he actually struck me as a character who was stuck in the whole gender situation at the same time as the women were, but in how males get affected by sexism at the same time, where he was obviously someone who was more effeminate a little bit, but mostly scholarly, more interested in learning sides of things. Sorry, more strong in learning things. That's not the right word for it. Interest isn't the right word. His strength was in that side of things. Nowadays, he probably, in our world, he would have been a scientist or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But because he was in a world where the value was in being masculine, a male, and in going off to war, he was wanting to go off and do those things. And so he was in his own way being affected by that gender divide and those gender expectations.
Yeah, no, that's very, very astute, Mel. I think that is right on the money.
Absolutely, especially when he breaks in and he's a washerwoman and he's teaching them all how to, like, because you like, if you iron it like this or do it slightly damp, and they're all like, he's in his element.
Well, you're constantly because you're going through this experience where you're constantly finding out that more and more of the regiment are female, right? You're kind of waiting for Blouse to be one of them, but he's not.
Yeah.
And that's kind of sort of him playing with that kind of your expectations at the same time.
Yeah, I figured he wouldn't. I was pretty sure he wasn't going to be, because when Polly got bit in the socks by the horse, I think it was the horse, and his reaction was very much someone who had socks. If he didn't have socks, she probably would have not, like,
they will be socks forevermore.
Immediate visceral reaction to somebody else, like, having that experience. I was very much like, that is an empathetic, reaction.
I agree with you.
I do not think this person is going to turn out to be female, because you would not have had that sudden empathetic reaction to that.
But I would still think, though, that the whole point was that Pratchett was playing with that expectation, though.
Yeah, absolutely, playing with the expectation, and also playing with, like you said, playing with the expectations of gender in this world. And Blouse was just having it was all like, I think you're right, Elizabeth, there was so much of the nostalgia of his days in boarding school that in some ways he was trying to recapture, like being with a group of lads, the whole bit about the plays and dressing up, and Gertrude was his drag name. I can't remember his drag name, but he just obviously was having the best time. And the women, the washerwomen, actually going, we all know he's male, but he's enjoying himself. Let him live his life, which is so nice.
Yeah.
Actually, that's sorry. I was gonna shift it. So
say that, like, as you're saying, Mel, it is like commenting on, like, the effects of toxic masculinity and the expectations we have of men.
Yes.
And how Blouse is not conforming to them. I mean, even his name, right? Like,
yes.
But yeah, go on, Mel.
I was going to switch the topic a little bit, so if you've got anything else on this.
as you do, I also note that we never did get to what you wanted to say about propaganda, so keep that in mind too.
Go back to that. No, I was going to say,
certainly.
we're mentioning the washerwomen actually reminded me the commentary about what it's like to be in the place where war is happening, and having like that line being drawn in your area, and you know, you've got to work and you've got to survive and you've got to do things. I thought that was a really interesting element to bring into all of this, and even down to like even the tent city sort of. I'm calling it tent city just because it's the easiest way to get the picture of the encampment of the this side's people army. and army. Thank you. And all of that. I thought that was a really interesting element for him to bring in, and how they could use that as being a way to infiltrate as well. That being and to get into the fort and all of that sort of thing was a really interesting idea.
Yeah. And I did enjoy that part where they, like, Polly didn't like realize, and I actually kind of had forgotten myself, but when Jack Crimson said a city, you know, the front, it's not just a whole of soldiers. There's all of these services that go. That's what you were saying there, Mel. But it all goes with them. It's a traveling city, and I was like, oh, of course. And I knew then where we were going, because I was like, well, and of course there are houses of pleasure in these places. So
Tents of repute.
I don't want to call them that, because it's a, you know, it's so. That's no, it's a valid job.
Yep.
If they choose to be. So I didn't.
That's fair.
I was choosing not to go there, but yes, it's like So, and I enjoyed. And actually, it's really fun looking back at that whole interaction from Jackram when you learn, and then Jackram says, "Oh yes, and you know, go visit those places, you know." And I would just give them money and say, "You have a hard enough job. You have a nap." I was a little bit like, though, putting myself in the other feet of the prostitute, going, I don't really want to go to sleep, because what is this person going to do while I'm asleep? Like, I couldn't actually. I thought that's probably, it's like, I want to do the job. Yeah, because again, like being female, you're always like, you have to be on guard the entire time. So I was like, it's all well and good, but unfortunately,
good point.
Yeah. So I did, when I read that, I was like, it's a nice idea. I know I like this, but in reality,
maybe that's a fall down point for Pratchett, not seeing that side for women.
Yeah, and I mean, as you said, 2003, I think in the last 10 years, we've really looked at, sorry, I'm getting a little heavy now, but it's really that attitude of what you're saying about the media and propaganda and victim blaming and making it women's problems, that men are crap, and then trying to like teach men that we are always on vigilant, we are always on guard, we don't choose to put ourselves in harm's way. You know, stop blaming us. So there's that kind of thing that I think really has been like things that we have all understood unconsciously is sort of coming out, but that hasn't been, you know, it's kind of always been there, but I think now it's bubbling up to the surface. There's lots of very brave people say things to the media like, that is a shit headline. So sorry, I got a bit heavy.
No, you're good. I was just going to say, in defense of Pratchett, like, although Jackram says that's not what the prostitutes actually do. Like, they are on the job. Like, and that becomes a problem for Polly. And who was it with her? Shufti?
Was Shufti
the one with her?
I can't remember.
In the tent?
Yeah, because Shufti was pregnant, wasn't? Yeah, I think it was Shufti was there too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that, it becomes a problem for them, because the So even though that's what Jackram said, that's not like the what actually happened, or how the prostitutes were reacting either. So
So we're going to go into the propaganda element with William the Word and the truth. The obviously propaganda is a major part of any particular war, but in particular, I thought this one had so much relevance to what's going on in Ukraine, and I was just like, this just feels very real. like it was less deliberate, obviously, than what's going on in Ukraine and everything, but it is very muchly that sort of feeling of the story coming from the front lines and how that's reshaping the popular opinion and all of that sort of stuff. I thought was fascinating and a really good inclusion.
Like on multiple levels, because like you're folding in a previous character, and also like making this commentary.
Yes.
Yeah. It did seem to me, correct me if I'm wrong though, that the word, and this is also I thought was a really good commentary, especially for 2003. It felt very what's the word I'm looking for? Sensationalist type media. There's a name for it. I can't think. What's the name? No, the type of media that's very like, like the Murdoch owns a heap of them. Like they're very kind of tabloids. Thank you. Yeah, it felt very tabloidy, in which that they really weren't on anybody's side except their own, and what was going to make the story and what was going to get readers, which I thought was like, because it was 2003 and this has always been the case, but it's really coming, since with the internet and everything, and like clickbait essentially, which has always been around but not called that. So I also was like, oh, that's so still relevant. It still makes sense, and it just sort of shows like the longer things go on, the same, they remain the same kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. 2003, we're only talking a few years post Diana at this stage, and we're talking about Pratchett, who lives in England. And
I was definitely reflecting, having read Spare, I was reflecting on some of the insights that Prince Harry shared about, and I remember this going on about the practices of those particular tabloids and tapping phones and like paying people to get information, and so I was like going, oh yeah. This wasn't quite as serious as that, but I was
it wasn't
on some of that, like that kind of ways of getting information. Because the fact, on a different note, I really liked the vampire photographer. He was hysterical. Oh no, he just cracked me up. I was just like, I'm really into photography, but I kill myself every time.
Like, oh damn, that filter didn't work.
He's just like,
the whole scene was why I wanted to read The Truth after that. I was like, I need to read more of this.
It's also with other things, because he just cracked me up. I was just like, oh my god, of all the things to make your obsession/addiction, like this is just you've got a sadomasochistic streak, don't you? It was very funny, very, very funny. So yeah. And I liked, there was that bit of like the shaking hands and I having to grin, because I was like, hang on, I'm not ready, I'm gonna find the thing, say that. Hilarious.
Yeah.
So no, he was a great character. Made me laugh. I listened to, I want to check with you, Bobby, the audio book. So the one I had on Audible had Catherine Parkinson doing basically most of it, and then there were two other voices, Bill Nighy and Peter Serafinowicz, and I'm not sure which one did the what do you call the bits at the bottom where you're talking about it with
footnotes,
the annotations, footnotes. And so there would be like a little chime, and then you would get this male voice giving like the footnote, and then we would go back, and the footnotes were very funny, but I thought that was quite interesting, having a completely different voice, because Catherine Parkinson was doing lots of different accents and stuff, and some of them were not great. I have to admit, the Eggerina one I had to rewind a lot because I couldn't understand what they were saying. Yeah. And I'm not the only one who thought that. I read the reviews afterwards, and I was like, a lot of people have struggled with some of the character accent choices, and so I wanted to check with Bobby who you had and what you thought.
So the version that I ended up finishing the book with, which was the Kobo version, and that was Catherine Parkinson, and it did the same thing. I assumed the reason why they picked like Bill Nighy, I think, was doing all of the footnote interjections. I assumed the reason why they picked that was because they were trying to get you to think of this as this was the author popping his head in to give you a bit of extra context.
I didn't have any problem with that. I wondered what you thought. I quite liked it.
So as far as footnotes go, that was a pretty good way of doing it, because it made it really obvious that we were breaking the fourth wall, as it were, long enough for you to get some extra information, and then we're popping back in. And so it did a really good job of compartmentalizing those things so that my brain would switch gears as I was going. Or as the story was going on, which helped a lot. I've had books where they tried to include footnotes, and it was the same person. And if anyone has read Will Wheaton's newest book, it's the one where he basically went back to Just a Geek, and he added a whole bunch of stuff where he went back, and there's a lot of apologizing in this, but he tries to use two different voices. He tries to use the same pacing, the same speech patterns as he did in the original recording for most of it, and then he interjects with his more mature older voice, and it got really confusing. I couldn't tell which. I couldn't remember which. I couldn't figure out which bits sometimes were the old and which parts were the new updated annotations. I'm like, I should have just read the book. I should not have done the audio, which I tend to like Will Wheaton audiobooks. I fall asleep to them. I find his voice quite soothing for the most part when it comes to reading audiobooks. So so that's a really good example of something where there were a lot of interjections and they didn't do a good enough job breaking them apart, where I could tell what was a reread and what was new information. So I really liked that. The other one that I did, and I
tell me about the first audiobook that you had.
The first audiobook that I had, they split back and forth across chapters, I think, but I only did the first couple of hours with that one, and then it ended up going back to the library before I got any farther, because that was the one that David and I were listening to together, and then he got COVID and we weren't sleeping in the same room. So and I was holding off to finish Monstrous Regiment, which he finished without me. He was sick, so he was forgiven, but
you do look what you did for him, and he still went off and finished the book.
Yeah, it's all right. So I don't remember. There was a lot of switching off and on. So I think from what I remember, it was the male voice was most of it, and then every once in a while you'd get it was like a surprise to me to have a female speaking.
Was it like Polly's internal monologue or something? That seems
odd. Actually, it might have been that. Let me here. If you guys want to keep talking, I will go find the catalog.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would find that really disturbing to switch between it. The thing that they did really well in the Catherine Parkinson one is when it was in footnote, there was a little chime.
Yeah, I really liked that.
Because it was like, oh, we've got a footnote coming up, and it, like you said, as I was pretty sure it's Bill Nighy, having heard Pratchett talk, it's a little closer to his voice, so it was a little bit and they were very funny. I burst out laughing, but it was hilarious because I guess it was a third of the way, and I remember Elizabeth saying, oh, there's a lot of excerpts, in it, and I was like, I haven't heard that many of them, and then they started bonking up. And I was like, oh, I see what she's talking about.
Stephen Briggs was the narrator. So the other version, the one that I got, that I'm assuming was part of the American market, because that's the one that King County Library had, that was Stephen Briggs. He was fine. I didn't mind listening to him at all. I think if nothing else, the thing with Catherine was that I picked up that Jackram was a woman before it was revealed. I think she let that slip with how she chose to narrate
because Jackram, of this, right? I
was like, oh, I think you're hidden too, and so
whereas I didn't pick up on that at all.
I mean, I was suspicious of everybody at some point.
Someone has to hand Polly the socks, and I don't think it was Strappy.
No. But I also thought it was, as I said, it made sense in the end. But I was also Jackram. It had, just wants good people, wants to support good
Yeah.
people. I mean, it made sense again then, there's an empathetic response to this, but I
think it was the cadence she chose to use. Like there,
right.
I would compared to the what's his name? Blouse. I think it was
Blouse.
The one that was very obviously like was in the end did not turn out to be someone on the cover. Yeah, it was Blouse. Yeah,
or Strappy. Okay.
Yeah. There was some, like, I noticed at some point, like, all of the characters that were being revealed as being women, they all had particular cadences, like they all had a similar cadence with how they were speaking. And then I noticed that it was the same for Jackram, and that didn't carry over for the other ones. And I was like, oh, I wonder.
You're a lot more switched on than I was.
I think that was possibly not even intentional on her part. She might not have realized she was doing it, for all I know.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because I didn't pick up on that. It's very smart of you. Yeah.
Did anybody know about the origins of the title?
I don't. I have to say, I originally thought it was because there were monsters because there was Igorina and there was Jade, and I thought that was like where they were going, but sure.
Okay, so it's actually from a document that was produced in 1558. That's first blast of the trumpet against Monstrous Regiment of Women. And it was about basically a document arguing against women being in positions of power, in particular in rural and things along those lines. So I thought that was a fascinating thing to come across and discover that there was actual reason for this name, given the lack of monsters themselves. So yeah, I thought one was worthwhile sharing.
Very cool. Very cool.
That I didn't know. That was cool. Thank you.
That is very cool. The other thing I want to check with you, and maybe it wasn't as much of a problem, did you have to, like, were there any characters you struggled to understand, Bobby, that like I did? I had to rewind a few times.
No, I didn't really have any trouble with any of them. I mean, I can see why, like looking back at it now, I can see why some people would struggle with, particularly like Igorina and stuff. Yeah, but I didn't. Yeah. Sorry.
No. It's just interested, and I don't know what Peter Serafinowicz narrated as part of it, so I don't know his name's on it, and I know him, so I was like, oh, and then I have no idea what part he was narrating, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, definitely not Gemma. He did the footnotes.
Yeah. No, that's what I had too. I did, and this is one for Kirsten. I did like a lot of the talk about cheese, because it just reminded me of Jasper Ford a lot.
On to the cheese. I don't know if I've gotten to that part, but yes, when you said cheese, I knew you were talking about Jasper Ford.
Yeah, because to be, which is hilarious, is like when I read I read the one, I guess, book of Pratchett, and I was in my late teens. Who I really got into after that, at that point, was Jasper Ford, where I just read everything.
I haven't read one of his in ages, and I know do you know he's bringing out a sequel to Shades of Grey, which finally, and like after God knows how old that book is, and I can't remember I don't remember.
Yeah, I kind of felt like he should have left Tuesday. Kind of kept dredging on the Tuesday part, and I was just a bit sad about the character with the final book. So I was just like, I think I'm gonna leave that to the side. Yeah. I enjoyed the cheese. Cheese aspect.
Just as a last thing to just let everybody know about, there's a series of essays published by Tansy Rayner Roberts, who's an Australian author, called Pratchett's Women. And there's actually one of the essays in there is on Monstrous Regiment called Socks, Lies, and the Monstrous Regiment. But in general, like, they're a good series of essays in terms of if you're interested in reading a little bit more about Pratchett and understanding how women and that side of things, because Tansy is always awesome as well. So worthwhile checking that out if you want to have a read as well. It's available for download. It cost me $6 to get it. Yeah. Nice. Not a long read either, so it's, and because it's chapters, you can just dip in and out when you feel.
I was going to say, are they academic papers or are
I wouldn't
they...
go, no, they're not that far, but they're just like little essays. Think of them more like blog posts.
Tansy has an
yeah.
academic background, particularly in like ancient history.
Yes.
And she has a background in criticism as well, particularly around Doctor Who and feminism in Doctor Who. But like she is fanish about bunches of things, including Terry Pratchett. But that also does not put the scales over her eyes, and she is like quite willing to be critical where it's warranted.
She can enjoy something and still criticize it at the same time.
Yeah.
Like our book club.
Exactly.
Club, yes.
Exactly that. But yes, if you wanted to read a little bit more, I would recommend that as a place to go, especially if you're planning to read more Pratchett as well.
Yeah. Could you post that in maybe the Books General for us if you have that link? That would be great.
100%.
Thank you.
No problems at all. All right, guys, I think we're good to wrap up. Is everybody good?
Yep.
Just as a final note, I enjoyed seeing Vimes where he appeared in the book, especially when the Monstrous Regiment are planning their escape from the kitchen. That was quite entertaining to me, and in fact, his and like the commentary on his and Ankh-Morpork's more generally fascination with underdogs was quite amusing. And very on point, I thought.
And he just would have that insight of like, people just want to go home. And I'm like, yeah.
But I mean, like in this particular case, he was like they're talking about like Ankh-Morpork having a soft spot for the underdog, which is why the news articles were such a big success, because Ankh-Morpork is used to thinking of itself as the underdog, which is like, commentary on like London attitudes and like would be like is definitely on point for like Australian attitudes. Used to thinking of ourselves as the underdog even when perhaps we've outgrown that.
Yes, but continuing the mentality regardless of these circumstances.
Yeah. So it's nice to see Vimes, and it was nice to see that sort of sheer glee and mayhem happening. And his working around the official powers, even when he is also an official power these days.
Because he still sees himself as an underdog.
Because he still sees himself as the lowly captain of the Night Watch, yes.
Nice.
Or we do as well. Like we are used to seeing Vimes as the underdog in some respects.
Despite being sent out on this very important mission. Alrighty, guys. Thanks for the chat, and thanks for watching if you watched. Bye.
Bye.